Good morning. This is Father Stephen Kelly from St. John's Church in Detroit. And we're continuing our series of daily morning meditations where we generally look at one or another of the readings that are appointed for morning or evening prayer, what is known as the daily office lectionary. And we're continuing to work our way now through St. Matthew's Gospel, which is appointed for evening prayer. And we are, as we mentioned yesterday, we're in the 5th chapter, which begins with what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. In other words, Jesus sets himself aside on the high place and looks down on the crowd, and begins to teach. He starts with the Beatitudes and then goes on with lots of great teachings about how it is that we are to live according to God's will for us, both particularly as well as God's will for all of humanity. And today we have chapter 5, verses 27 through 37. And there's lots of really hard things in here. And sometimes it's almost as if Jesus is using hyperbole, it feels like. And yet we have to absolutely take him at his word. Because we do hear this when we get to verse number 28. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Remember, Jimmy Carter said that once. He committed adultery in his heart once. But then he goes on to say, and if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. Now, Jesus is not telling you to be going and plucking out your eye and cutting off your hand. That is certainly not at all the intention of this. But it certainly would be better that if you have, for some reason, a chronic problem with your eye that's causing you to sin, it would absolutely be better if you didn't have that eye. If you had a chronic problem where your hand was leading you into sin, yes, it would be absolutely better if you didn't have that hand. But he is not necessarily saying that the remedy for this is for us to be going lopping off limbs or blinding ourselves. The reality is that by God's grace, we are able to conquer these sinful behaviors and activities. Remember, he starts out, what we read right before the part about lopping off hands and poking out eyes, is what he talks about extending the law, that adultery isn't just having marital relations with somebody with whom you're not married, but even if we have it lustfully in our heart, we're going in the wrong direction. We're heading the wrong way. And so what Jesus is talking about is finding that there are absolutes in the moral law that God has appointed, not because he's mean, not because he doesn't want us to have fun, not because he somehow thinks that it doesn't matter how we feel. If we want to do it, it must be okay. That's not at all why. It's because God has created us, and he knows what's best for us. He knows for us that marriage is to be between a man and a woman in holy matrimony, and anything outside of that causes complications because it's not the way for which we are created. And so then we have the issue of adultery. And so it is that Jesus is trying to drive home the point that even though we have the moral law that's been given to us, and that's generally summed up for us in the Decalogue, also known as the Ten Commandments, but the importance of us understanding that even if we can't follow it, right, and none of us will be perfect at following it, by grace we have both forgiveness and the ability and the opportunity by God's power for us to avoid the occasions of sin. One of the things that is so important when we talk about making an auricular confession, right, which is a great remedy for us to battle against those besetting sins, the sins we keep falling into and finding ourselves drawn to. An auricular confession helps us to not only be verbally accountable to another human being, but also can help us to receive a remedy from the priest if the priest is praying and asking God for the Holy Spirit to guide and govern him. He may have the absolutely right answer, which will help you in that battle against the world, the flesh, and the devil, and all those temptations that are leading you to sin. But one of the things, of course, about making your confession and turning back to the Lord and asking for forgiveness is that you purpose amendment of life. In other words, you're not only telling God that you're sorry for having sinned and asking him for forgiveness, but you're also asking him for the grace necessary to live this new life according to his purpose and plan for you. And so you are now purposing amendment of life, right? In other words, Lord, I've sinned and I don't want to sin again. Help me, Lord. And then honestly and openly and continually work on removing the sinful things and replacing them with positive virtues so that we don't end up having to lop off hands and poke out eyes, right? Because we are doing the things of cooperating with God's grace, right? Instead of doing something that perhaps may make us lustful in the eye, like if watching television is the problem and makes us adulterous with our eyes, well, guess what? Click, turn off the TV. Instead, spend some time praying, spend some time reading, spend some time with other human beings and glorifying God in doing that. There's wonderful remedies that by God's grace we can avoid sin. There's St. Paul over my shoulder, and he knows that we are drawn to sin. He knows we have a fallen human body, we have a fallen will, and we have distorted desires. But he also knows better than anybody else that God has a plan for us. And that if we are willing and cooperative, he will help us to accomplish it by grace. I hope that you have a wonderful Wednesday. May God bless you.